Here are the answers to the test your eye question. So to start, I wanted to say that I had intentionally removed the sound from this originally to make people really focus on the visuals. The other tricky bit here is that you guys are missing a lot of context about what happened before, what's happening during, what you're going to have when hopefully you're seeing your own horses, and context is extremely important. Um, I myself only do these like test your eye or test your ear type videos when I understand the context really, really well, for exactly the reason that things can be really, really hard to interpret when you don't have it. But of course, the goal is to be able to notice things in our horses so that when we are outside of the context where it's very clear, we can still interpret pretty effectively. All right, so we're going to now watch this through with the sound, and I'm going to pause it at different points. And so we're at the very beginning of the first video, and these were put into chronological order. And we're going to be looking mostly at the dark colored horse simply because the expressions here are more obvious on him as far as what he's providing for us for clues. The other horse is displaying some, but not as many. Now, one big problem with dark horses is they tend to blur out as a result of being really dark. They tend to blur out, fine scale features, and so it can be much harder to read expressions that are more subtle on them. The first thing that I want you guys to notice, and I'm going to go ahead and draw on my screen here, is that he has a kind of a pushed out nose right there. And I'm going to move that one so that it's not, okay, good. It goes away after a minute. But yeah, so if you look right there, he's got a pushed out nose. Now, traditionally, I would say that this doesn't tend to take the appearance of a really clamped jaw. But if you notice, there isn't really much in the way of wrinkles around that mouth either. He's got a very straight line. It's not kind of soft and curved down like a horse who's in a relaxed position will be. It's this very straight line with no little wrinkles around it. And so that is suggesting that he's maybe got some tension in the muzzle. Also, take a look at where he's orienting because this can be a really good context clue. In things like play and positive affective states, typically it's not going to be oriented towards a specific location. It's possible it might be oriented towards an individual, like if they're playing with another horse, right? But if they're reorienting to a specific location and again, then that might be suggestive that you're not dealing with a positive affective state because they're showing a lot of interest in the thing. Now, it gets tricky there when you're dealing with things like food. And there's some debate among, even in the scientific community, among studies, like does food being nearby but not accessible indicate a positive or a negative affective state? So that would be an example of a scenario where I wouldn't want to offer this as a test for you guys because it's very unclear whether horses are actually feeling good or bad about that situation. So it's not a great one to test somebody on. All right, so let's go ahead and play this video. Okay, now one thing to notice here, and I'm gonna go ahead and shift it so you can see his head a little better, because he shifts out of frame. But one thing to notice here with the video is that, he moved away and there wasn't anything about that movement particular that suggests, a positive or negative affective state. But he drops his head, and one commenter, and I thought this was really brilliant, pointed out that, oh, maybe they're in a novel environment, in which case this head lowering is very much within expectation. Oftentimes in novel environments, there is an elevation of stress, but they'll use play in order to help alleviate it. So if you put horses in new scenarios that are friendly with each other and have played in the past, you might see a bump up in play. And of course, they're going to be checking out scents and smells on the ground. Well, for this particular set of horses, and again, this is context, um, this area is not new to them. They have access to it all the time. They often get buckets in here. They were actually brought in here to be getting food. And so this is not a scenario where it's a novel situation for these horses. Okay, so in this instance, the head lowering is now out of place. There isn't really a good reason for the head to be suddenly dropped down, for this horse to suddenly be checking out smells on the ground. And so in this case, we have a behavior that doesn't match the context. which are often called displacement behaviors within the context of like behavior analysis type things. Basically, it's kind of any behavior that an animal is doing um, when it's kind of in some state of conflict. Those behaviors aren't matching the context of the situation. It's hard to know whether it's offering some comfort or whether it's, simply a side effect of feeling stressed. And so these kind of all get termed under this umbrella displacement behavior type thing. Okay, so now he's looking off that way. And right about here, if you listen closely, it's not picking up well, but there's a helicopter. And you can see that this horse on the right-hand side, if I shift this, is also looking in the same direction as the black horse, right? So there's two horses orienting to the same direction. Now, for context, if you don't know, these guys are mustangs. They were gathered via helicopter. They live really close to a military base, so typically a helicopter going over them does not bother them. However, this helicopter was doing training runs in a nearby pond, so it was doing a lot of ducking down and swooping up, which is the exact pattern of flight that a helicopter does in a roundup when it's pushing horses. And so it's a very different tone of sound as opposed to being this nice, steady, like chop, chop, chop as it goes overhead. It kind of does this getting quieter and getting louder and getting quieter and getting louder. And you can see flashes off the helicopter blades and all these pieces. Um, and the sound for them is going to be waffling all around them because it's in a valley. And so it's kind of echoing off the sides. And so that's likely what he came over to look this direction because there's a bit of an echo kind of hitting the hill that you can see off to the left-hand side of the video here. Okay. Some other things that we'll look at. So now we're going to get a really nice look at his face in just a second here. I'm going to wait for him to lift his head up. Yeah, so again, looking at the mouth, this is a much clearer image. While he doesn't really have much tension here in the jaw region, if you look down towards his lips, you can see there's absolutely no wrinkles in that mouth. We've got this perfectly straight, almost a little over-exaggerated line. The other thing too is that he hasn't been running in the context of this video. Obviously the viewer doesn't know if they were sprinting around beforehand, but in this case they weren't. He'd been having quite a long pause of kind of looking in this other direction. But look how dilated these nostrils are. And if you're watching, he's taking in a lot of air. And when horses are going through a higher arousal state, when they are have kind of an elevated fear level, they're going to be taking in more oxygen. And so oftentimes you're going to see that larger nostril and you're going to see a faster movement in the nose and kind of that breathing in. Just because your horse is breathing hard doesn't mean they're afraid, obviously. If they've been running around and playing and all that, they're going to do that. But especially if your horse is otherwise showing what appears to be calm behaviors where they're not running around and so on, like in this case, and you're seeing these very large dilated nostrils and there's not some medical reason for it, then it might be one thing you check down among others that suggest they're not feeling as well. Now the muzzle is getting a little less tight. You can see there's some wrinkles that are starting to come back in. This horse doesn't really show much stress in his eyes, so there's not really any wrinkles or triangulation there. But look at the head elevation. You can see that it is quite a bit higher than where he would normally keep it. This guy tends to keep a fairly horizontal profile. And so knowing your horse and how they are when they're relaxed versus not is of course really important, because some horses typically carry their head higher even when they're calmer, right? And so you want to kind of know where their head carriage is off of kind of their normal baseline in pasture. And again, you can see the horse behind is orienting in that kind of same direction. And you can see that he will start to turn his head here in a second. And he's also orienting in that similar direction. You can really get a good look at those nostrils kind of going, and that mouth is retightened a little bit. Okay. All right, so we'll pull up the other one. Yeah, so in this one, this is chronologically after the fact. Okay. And this one can be tricky because they're doing a little bit of running around, and obviously play can be a way for many animals to alleviate stress. Okay, and you can see that, there's a fair amount of kicking already from the lighter colored horse in the background here. And that could be just because they're in a restricted space. Obviously, you're going to get, the inability to really stride out and put in big movements in a smaller space. And so horses are going to tend to be more likely to do things like rearing, bucking, that kind of stuff, which is how they can produce more energy into movements without having the ability to stride out. Yeah, and there isn't a lot here. I mean, this horse's head profile is actually relatively low. The horse behind it has a pretty elevated head profile, but there's not a lot in this particular set of images that is suggesting, one affective state versus another. And this is where it gets really tricky too, because we now have horses that are running around. And if it's play, then, their nostrils are going to be dilated and all of that already. And so now it starts to get a little tricky. But one of the key things here again is that you're going to see that this horse is, he immediately goes to orient over here to the right. Okay. And you can see as this horse turns, there's a lot of tension in that mouth. That lip is so squished that it's actually popping out to the right-hand side. Okay. She actually does show the eye worry pretty darn well comparatively. So let's see if I can stop on one where you can see it. This isn't great. It's okay. But you can really see that squished out lip here. And that really tight mouth profile. Okay, and she's got a bit of wrinkling, although the sun is washing it out, but you can kind of see the triangulation there above the eye. And the head elevation, of course, the neck is really lifted. And this horse, again, tends to carry her head much more horizontal when she's in a relaxed state. So really be aware of where your horses are. Now, the next thing to notice about this is that, these horses are often comfortable being in a close space here together without having much issue. And again, you need to know your horse as well. If your horses are often in conflict when in a tight space on a normal, relaxed scenario, this is going to be a good metric for you. But for these guys, typically doesn't bother these horses to be right up each other's butts. They're usually fine with it. There's not typically a lot of kicking, squealing, that kind of thing. And what you see is that as the lighter horse behind, tries to squeeze in next to the dark horse, he gets a warning kick, right? And two pretty, he doesn't kick out with his feet. It's definitely a warning rather than, true aggressive contact. But this would be abnormal for him to be anxious about having her this close. And that's not an uncommon thing for horses in flight, is that they want to bunch together because they're nervous and so they flock. But also it's really important that when they're running, that their buddy next to them isn't running too close. And so they will often kind of reinforce their space zone with using threats. And so he's probably in an elevated state of fear in this situation. And so he is much less comfortable with having her right in next to him. So he gives a warning kick. And she, of course, returns it in the next section. So there you go. They are in a negative affective state and is on account of a helicopter. And that is how I knew the behaviors would be kind of a negative affective state, so I could properly quiz you guys. All right, good job.